Welcome back. As a part of our conceptual class, we understood it is not straightforward to read and write the data from SQL databases. We have to include the Java database connectivity driver as a part of the Spark class path, and also we got to provide the proper jar itself. Apart from that, we need to specify the authentication details as well. That is what we understood. What we will do is we'll use a MySQL database as a part of this practicals to read the data from MySQL database and create the data frame. To do that, we need to do a couple of preparation steps. First and foremost thing is create the database in MySQL and create the table which we want to import. If you have already created a table, you can use the same table, but we will show you how to create the table in MySQL and insert the data into that. We will use this particular table to import into Spark and create the data frame. I hope you would have already installed MySQL. If you are not, it is very simple. Go ahead and install MySQL. After you install MySQL, you have to log into MySQL. Depending upon how you have configured, you can log into MySQL in a different ways. One of the ways this. I will provide the password. I logged into MySQL. We need to check if we have databases. To do that, we can use show databases. We do have multiple databases here. But what we'll do is we'll create a database. How do we do that? Very simple. Create database. Name of the database would be pets. We created the database. If you see here, when I said show databases earlier, the pets database was not listed as a part of this list. Now, if I go ahead and execute the same command, we'll see pets as one of the database. What we will do is we'll go ahead and use this database. Use pets. Yes. Now we are into this database. Have we created any tables within this database? Let us go ahead and check that. We don't have. We need tables. Let us go ahead and create one table. How do we do that? We can create the table in MySQL with this syntax. Say create table and name of the table and provide the columns which you want them to be included as a part of this table. In this case, we have 4 columns: ID, name, owner, and birth. You also need to specify the data types, like ID is int, name is varchar, owner is varchar, birth is a date, it is a not null. Okay. And we need to specify the primary key as well. These are the comments. Let us go ahead and create the table now. I'm creating a table. Yes, if I go and check, there is a table. There should be table. Yeah, we do have a table. But do we have a data inside this table? Not really. Let's go ahead and check. Select star from cats. We don't. Let us insert some data into this table. The way we do it is insert into, then provide the name of the table and provide the columns into which you want to insert the data. Let's go ahead and insert this data. Here we inserted the data. Let's go ahead and check this. We do have the data. We have 4 columns: ID, name, owner, and birth. And ID is the primary key. So we have successfully created the database, then created the table within the database and inserted the data into the table. What we'll do now is we'll create the data frame by reading this table from MySQL. Next preparation step is, as we discussed, as a part of the theory, we need to have a jar file. Since we are using a MySQL database here, we are working with MySQL connector jar file. Depending upon your project, you may be working with PostgreSQL, you may be working with any other RDBMS databases. You need to download the jar file pertinent to the database you are using. In this case, we are using MySQL connector jar file. You can go to this particular website and download this MySQL connector Java 5.1.45 tar.gz. After you download, it will be there in your downloads folder. Then go ahead and click and say extract here. Once you do so, you'll get a extracted folder of your jar file. After that, what you need to do is, you know where your Spark is installed. In my case, I have installed a Spark in my home directory. I can get into that. There will be jars folder within your Spark directory. Get into that. So what you need to do is, the folder you extracted, you need to copy that into this path. The path being, wherever you have installed the Spark, within that you have a jars folder. Within that you have to copy the jar file, MySQL connector Java 5.1.45. This version also differs from project to project. Whichever the project you are using, please check which connector works with that project and download that particular jar file and copy that into your jars folder within the Spark. I have already copied it. You can see here, this is where. Then what you got to do is get into the folder where your jar file is there. This is the second preparation step. We are done with two steps now. One is, we have created the database and table in MySQL. That is ready. Second thing is, we have downloaded the MySQL connector and copied that into jars directory within the Spark. We'll go ahead with the next step now. What we need to do is, we need to launch the Spark with this class path. How do we do that? Very simple. This is how you provide the driver class path. What we did is, we are invoking the PySpark by providing the driver class path. You can see PySpark driver class path, the jar file, then give a space and provide the new line character, then provide the jars, then MySQL. Copy this and invoke the PySpark. We can go ahead and invoke the PySpark by providing the class path. Here you can provide the path, or you can invoke it from the directory where these jar files are there. We are invoking the Spark now. We have invoked the PySpark with this class path. Now we are all set to read the data from MySQL database and create the data frame. We'll go ahead and do that now. Let us write MySQL df cats. This is the name of the data frame. Say Spark dot read dot format. In case of format, we got to provide the JDBC here. Okay, we are all set with our options. Let us critically look into all these options. We are providing the name of the data frame, that is MySQL catch. Spark is a session. Read is a data frame reader. In the format, we are specifying the JDBC. And after that, we are providing the driver. In this case, we are providing the MySQL JDBC driver. Depending upon the project you are involved in, you got to provide that particular driver as one of the option. Then pay attention here. For the URL, you need to provide, in this case, we are using the MySQL. And what is this? This is the IP of this system. Depending upon your project, you got to ask your admin, where is my MySQL installed? You have to provide the either domain name or IP of that system. Then 3306 is the default port of MySQL. In case if the port is changed, again you need to check with your administrator and find out where exactly your MySQL or whatever the database from which you are trying to read the data is installed. Then pets is the name of the database from which we are importing the data from. And the next option, especially after 3.0, you need to specify whether you have a authentication or not. In this case, I'm not using the authentication, but in case in your project you are using it, you have to provide the use SSL as true and provide the authentication. After that, you have to specify the table from which you are trying to import the data. In this case, we are importing the data from a table called catch, and you need to provide the authentication details. What is the username? What is the password? In this case, mine is a root and this is my password. You can also assign these things to variable and pass that as a part of these options. So we are all set. It is almost similar to reading the data from any file, but you need to take care of this driver, URL, and the authentication details. We are all set to create the data frame by importing the data from our cats table in pets database. This is the data we are trying to import into Spark and create the data frame. Let's go ahead and execute this and see how it works. Yes, we are done. Let's look at this data frame. There you go. We created the data frame by reading the data in MySQL database management system from database pets and table cats. If you look here, this is MySQL where we created the table called cats, and this is how the data looks like in MySQL. We have read this data and created the data frame in Spark. Now that we created this data frame, do we need to provide a special or some other treatment for this data frame because you read the data from the database? Not really. Data frame is data frame whether you have read the data from file or from the database. You can subject this data frame for any of the transformations you want to subject it to, depending upon the project. Wonderful, then. We understood how we can read the data from any of the RDBMS databases and create the data frame. Have a great time.